Well, good morning, everybody. It is Sunday, August the 16th. I hope this finds you doing very well, and I am very glad that you've decided to tune in for Bible class this morning as we continue to take a look at the Proverbs. And so I hope you've got your Bibles with you. If you don't have your Bibles, why don't you grab them real quick, find the Old Testament, and then open the book of Proverbs. And when you get to the book of Proverbs, chapter 4 is where you want to be. We're going to pick up the Proverbs there at chapter 4. If you've been with us since the beginning, you know we're trying to cover one chapter every class session. But today we're going to cover two chapters. We're going to cover chapter 4 and chapter 5. And the reason is chapter 4 is basically one long exhortation to please listen. Listen. We'll say a little bit more about that in just a minute. So I don't expect it'll take us a great deal of time covering chapter 4. Let me tell you, it's been one of those days, though, for me, as I record this. I might sneeze at some point during the study because the first time, this is not the first take. I try to really record these in one take now. I used to take, multiple takes, but I've gotten so used to it and all, and I've quit trying to be absolutely perfect, and so I do it in one take, even with a major flub. And so during the first take, I was teaching away, and suddenly I sneezed. And I said, I'm not retaking this. I was about 10 minutes in. And I said, I'm not doing a retake. I sneezed because last night at 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and my throat was itching, and I knew what that meant. This happens about every 6 months or so. I will have this allergy attack. It'll come out of nowhere. And suddenly, the fountain of the nose will open and I will start on a sneezing jag. And so I got up 1 a.m. I'm shuffling to the bathroom to get my Allegra, and I'm trying to head it off at the pass. And so I did, but that just kind of helps mitigate it. It doesn't take it away. It's going to go on really throughout the day. And so a sneeze may come up out of nowhere. And so I did that the first time. I said, I'm not stopping this. We're going to continue. And so I kept going. And then, of course, there's lights around me. And this light over here suddenly went off for a second and then came on. And I said, well, I'm sure you noticed that suddenly on this side of me, I became a little bit dark, and then it got light again. I'm not stopping this. I'm not stopping. And then it went off again, and it stayed off. And I was about 20 minutes into the lesson. I said, I'm not stopping this. I'm going to continue to go on. And then a minute later, I noticed that I had no sound at all. The batteries died halfway through this lesson. So it has been one of those mornings. I'm going to get through this now. And it doesn't matter what happens. Well, I'll take that back if the sound goes out again, which I hope it doesn't. I got brand new batteries in the microphone. But it doesn't matter, almost no matter what happens, we're getting through this. Okay, chapter 4. Like I said, this chapter is all about listening. The Proverbs is all about living right. And in Proverbs chapter 4 here, all the way basically from chapter 1 through verse 1 through 13, and then verse 20 through 23 is all about reminding us that living right is all about listening. It's all about listening. That is, it's all about listening to God. It's not just about listening, it's about who you listen to. And living right and living successfully is all about listening to God and doing what He says. And so with that in mind, let's take a look real quick at some of the passages here, some of the verses of chapter 4. Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father, give attention to you. Give attention that you may gain understanding, for I give you sound teaching. Do not abandon my instruction. Now, these first few verses of chapter 4, what we have here is that this fatherly exhortation to listen is even more emphatic than some of the other things that we've seen so far in the first 3 chapters. It covers, like I said, almost this entire chapter. Now, then when it gets down to verse 3, take a look at that. When I was a son to my father, tender and the only son in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. Acquire wisdom, acquire understanding. Do not forget nor turn away from the words of my mouth. He's doing what we've all done with our kids. If you have kids and they're old enough, they're older. You've said, I've been in your place. I've walked in your shoes. I've traveled the road that you're on. And I remember my dad and my mom trying to give me some counsel, and there were too many times when I rejected that counsel, and it was to my detriment. Please, I know the struggles. I know your present struggles that you're going through. And I promise you that if you will listen, it will help you get through those struggles. Now look at verse 6. Do not forsake her, and she'll guard you. Love her, and she will watch over you. By the way, the her there, that's wisdom. Don't forsake her. She's going to guard you. Love her. She's going to watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom. And with all your acquiring, get understanding. Prize her, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you will embrace her. Verse 9, she will place on your head a garland of grace. She will present you with a crown of beauty. Wisdom is the greatest possession that you could ever have. And if you will take hold of it, you will win at life. You'll win at life. Your life will more likely be a life that is characterized by peace, by satisfaction, by fulfillment. You will be honored by God. Listen, that's what this is all about. So again, he starts in verse 10. Hear, my son, accept my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. I've directed you in the way of wisdom. I've led you in upright paths. When you walk, your steps will not be impeded. And if you run, you will not stumble. Again, if you'll listen, you'll be blessed. Take hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is life. Now, after this first 13 verses exhorting him to listen, what he does in verses 14 through... Okay, here. Oh! I told you, I knew it would happen. But like I said before, not stopping. Not going to do it. It's just an allergy. I've got my cup of water here to get my throat back in shape. Okay. We press on. Sneeze is in the background. It's in the past. Hopefully it was just one. What he does in verses 14 through 19 now. So first 13 verses, it's all about listen. Please listen. I'm begging you to listen. I'm begging you to listen. You won't be sorry. It'll be for your benefit. You'll be so glad that you did. What he does in verses 14 through 19 then, he gets into one specific moral issue. So again, most of the chapter is not about any specific moral issue. It's about an exhortation to listen. But here in verses 14 through 19, there is one moral issue that he wants to try to impress upon his son. And God wants to impress upon us. And that is, don't follow the paths of evil people. Take a look at it. Verse 14, do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not proceed in the way of evil men. Avoid it. Do not pass by it. Turn away from it and pass on. Notice the language that he's using. It's the language of taking a journey. Great image, because life's a journey. And there's going to be all kinds of roads that you can take. And here are these roads that evil people take. Don't go down that road. If you go down that road, it will be to your detriment. No. You take another course. Evil people, he's going to go on to say, he uses this vivid picture of depravity, basically saying they live for crime. It's their food, it's their drink, it's their sleep. They just live for it. And it's going to cause them to fall. And if you go that way, you're going to fall too. Look what he says in verse 16. For they can't sleep unless they do evil. And they're robbed of sleep unless they make someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and they drink the wine of violence. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn. They shines brighter and brighter into the full day. The way of the wickedness is like darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. They will fall. And they scratch their head and they wonder, well, what was that all about? What it was all about was their choices. and don't follow them in that course. And so then in verses 20 through 27, he gives his final appeal to listen. And again, he's not concerned here about any kind of specific moral issue. He just wants his son to stay on the true path of wisdom. And what you're going to see here, he's going to use a lot of different body parts to get his point across. The eye and the nose and the hand and the foot and the ear. Look at verse 20. My son, give attention to my words. Incline your ear to my saying. Don't let them depart from your sight. He says, keep them in the midst of your heart at the end of verse 21. For they are life to those who find them and health to all their body. He says, from it, in the end of verse 23, flow the springs of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth. Put devious speech from you. Let your eyes look directly ahead. Let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right nor to the left. Turn your foot from evil. Listen to me, son. Listen to me. And if you will listen to wisdom, if you'll guard your heart, if you'll let wisdom build a hedge around your heart, keep your eyes focused, then you're going to live with joy, and you're going to live with vigor, and you're going to live with contentment, and you're going to live with peace. That kind of life comes as a direct result of heeding wisdom. Okay, so chapter 4 is all about listen. I'm begging you, listen. If you want to win at life, listen, embrace wisdom. Now we get to chapter 5. And as we get to chapter 5, now we're going to have another specific moral issue that is going to be just jammed in our faces with clarity, with frankness, and oh, it is so critical to winning at life. And that is the pitfalls of sexual immorality. You know, the Bible, and I've said this from time to time, the Bible doesn't hide or obscure the power of the temptation of illicit sex. The Bible doesn't dodge it. The Bible doesn't obscure it. The Bible doesn't tiptoe around it. The Bible is straightforward and it is frank. And so what we come to here in chapter 5, in very clear language, God is warning us of the debacle that awaits us if we succumb in this area of life. If we succumb in this area of life, there is nothing good that is on the other side. And so with that in mind, he's also going to say, but there is sexual joy. There is joy and contentment and fulfillment that await us if we follow, if we'll listen to God's instructions about sex and pursue, and embrace those instructions and pursue His instructions on human sexuality. Our life is going to be so blessed. And so with that in mind, my son, give attention to my wisdom, incline your ear to my understanding. And so he begins again with the typical appeal to listen to what I'm saying and do what I say. He says that you may observe discretion. Discretion here, by the way, is another term that's in the word family of wisdom. Again, observe wisdom, and your lips may reserve knowledge. Okay, here we go. Here is God's instruction concerning sex. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey. Now, the word for adulteress literally means the other woman. And so this is, in other words, someone other than your wife. Now, of course, the principle works both ways. So it's someone other than your spouse. It's someone other than your husband, you ladies. It's someone other than your wife, you men. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. We can be drawn to people, obviously, because of how they make us feel with their words. In this case, he's talking to his son. Smoother than oil is her speech. Our ego can easily be inflated. Our inflago. I don't know. Our inflago. That's your inflated ego. Our ego can so easily be inflated, and that can be a problem for everybody. That can set everyone up for disaster, but it especially makes, frankly, men vulnerable. Because most men, one of our emotional needs is to be admired. It is what it is. It is the way God designed most of us, especially most of us men. And we can find ourselves in such a vulnerable place when our ego is stroked. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey. I like honey. I like it. I have, in my office in there, I have some. If you open my credenza, there is honey there. Because when I eat my oatmeal, which is also in there, I put honey in it. I had some Greek yogurt this morning. And I learned when I was in Greece a couple of years ago that the only way to eat yogurt is vanilla Greek yogurt with honey and walnuts. And so I like honey. It's sweet. And that's the picture here. It's so appealing. It's so tasty. It's so sweet. The lips of an adulteress, we can be drawn in by the speech of someone other than our spouse. But in the end, verse 4, take a look at it. In the end, verses 4 through 6, describe the bitter outcome of a sexual relationship that is not a relationship with our spouse. That is from someone other than our spouse. The end is bitter wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of Sheol. She does not ponder the path of her life. Her ways are unstable. She does not know it. An adulterous relationship leads to nothing but anguish. It leads to bitterness. It leads to disillusionment. It leads to emotional strain. It leads to physical problems. It can lead to all of that. Now, maybe not in the short term, maybe not instantaneously. In an instance, it might, it just may be pure fun. And it may take you emotionally to a place that you haven't been in a long, long time. But verse 4 again, but in the end, he's saying this is God speaking. He knows the end of this relationship. These relationships that are illicit are going to be destructive to you. Verse 6 there, she does not ponder the path of her life. Her ways are unstable. She does not know it. Hebrew scholars say that is actually very difficult in the Hebrew language to get the spot on meaning. There's a couple of potential possibilities. It can mean that she doesn't really know that she's leading him down the wrong path. It could mean that. Or it may mean that she's deliberately trying to lead him down a deadly path. But in the end, I don't think it really matters which one of those it means. Because either way, the point is, it's going to end in destruction. And so if you're going to be preserved, you're going to have to embrace wisdom. And you're going to have to stay away. You're going to have to give the stiff arm. You're going to have to resist the smooth, flattering speech. Okay, verse 7. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her door, and do not go near the door of her house. He is going to emphasize that ruin and disgrace is going to be at the end of this little adventure, this little sexual adventure, ruin and disgrace. Don't go near the door of her house. Keep your way far from her. You know, we have a little proverb of our own that I think really kind of captures what's being said here in verse 8. It is this: if you play with fire, you're gonna get burned. Actually, that comes from the Proverbs, not in those exact words, but we're gonna see that later. Those are the words that we use. If you play with fire, you're gonna get burned. If you play with something dangerous, ultimately it's going to bite you. And that's why he says, keep your, do not go near the door of her house. Listen, you've got to stay far, far away. You can't see how close to the edge that you can get. And well, I can get this close and still be okay. No, you will ultimately go over the edge. Do not go near the door of her house, or you will give your vigor to others and your years to the cruel one, and strangers will be filled with your strength, and your hard-earned goods will go to the house of an alien, and you will groan at your final end when your flesh and your body are consumed, and you say, how I have hated instruction and my heart spurned reproof. The one who yields to sexual temptation and pursues illicit sexual relationships, they stand to lose so much. Verse 9 there is they lose their sexual vitality. You'll give your vigor to others, your years to the cruel one. Your wealth, your strangers will be filled with your strength. Your hard-earned goods will go to the house of the wicked. It's going to cost you. It's very likely to even cost you financially. Verse 11, it's going to cost you something physically. The toll it will take on you physically. Verse 11, and you will groan at your final end when your flesh and your body are consumed. And finally, it's going to cost you your honor. Look at verse 14. I was almost in utter ruin in the midst of the assembly and congregation. I was almost in utter ruin in the midst of the assembly and congregation. It probably refers to the adulterers' public disgrace here and their humiliation. Listen, I've known people who've gone down this road, and that is exactly what has happened. They were able to dodge these consequences for a while, and they were convinced that they could always dodge the consequences, but they couldn't. And it cost them financially. It cost them physically and emotionally. It took a toll on them. It cost them their honor. God's right. Life continues to test this and prove that God knows what He's talking about. Look at verse 12. And you say to yourself, how I have hated instruction, and my heart spurned reproof. I've not listened, verse 13, to the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to my instructors. That reminds me, verse 12 and 13 is basically, it reminds me that when we find ourselves in a mess, we need to get mad at ourselves because, frankly, we're usually to blame for the mess we're in. We're usually to blame. You know, we live in a world, as you know, and you've heard me climb up on my soapbox any number of times and say this. We're a culture of victims. Everything is someone else's fault. Well, if you're going to be really successful, if you're going to win at life, there ultimately comes a time when you've got to look in the mirror and you got to look at that guy or you got to look at that gal And you've got to say to yourself, honestly, yeah, some of this is on me. Yeah, this is on me. It's not on my boss. It is not on my parents. It is not on the government. It's on me. And you got to start making better decisions. You've not listened. The counsel's there. If you would have followed it, you wouldn't have got yourself into this mess. Listen, God has great counsel for you to win at life. I don't care who you are. I don't care what the color of your skin is. I don't care if you're male or female. I don't care if English is your first language, second language, or third language. I don't care what country you were born in. Whether you or not you win at life, in the world that we live in, is largely up to you. Your decisions. If you will listen to wisdom, you'll win. And that's what we're reminded of here in verses 12 and 13. All that you've lost, the situation that you're in, is because of the decisions you're making. It's time to start listening. Listening to God. And if you listen to God, you'll win. Emotionally, your reputation, your peace, you'll win. Oh, look at verse 15. So you want to be protected from illicit sexual relationships. Okay, first of all, don't be drawn in by the smooth speech. Don't be all the temptation that resists the temptation. Don't play with it. Don't play with that fire. But here we get to verse 15, and we have another source of protection from adultery. And that source of protection is your wife. This is the first time this is introduced in the book of Proverbs. It is not going to be the last time that it is introduced. And again, the principle works both ways. Your wife or your husband, your spouse. The best protection against sexual temptation. Listen, we turned over here to Proverbs chapter 5 when we were in the Sermon on the Mount. So this should be kind of fresh in your mind. If it sounds vaguely familiar, it's because I remember turning to Proverbs chapter 5 when we were talking about lust and divorce and all of those kinds of things, and sexual purity. I took you here. It's okay to go back, though. It's okay to hear it again. This is another source that God has given us. He's telling us that protect us from adultery. The best protection is a good sexual relationship with your spouse. We're going to see it over in the New Testament as well. I know that I took you here as well, over in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians. Because of immoralities, Paul says here in verse 2, because of sexual immorality, each man is to have his own wife, because we're sexual beings, and because of the temptation of sexual sin, God's given us a place where we can protect ourselves, a spouse. Because of immorality, let each man have his own wife, and each woman is to have her own husband. See, this emphasizes the reality of our strong sexual impulses. God created us as sexual beings. A husband must fulfill his duty to his wife. Likewise, a wife to her husband. Verse 5, stop depriving each other, except in some very carefully orchestrated circumstances where you both agree for just a short period of time for the sake of prayer, and then come back together, he says there in verse 5 of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, lest Satan tempt you. So he's emphasizing that here. Verse 16, look at it. Should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the street? Now, back in verse 15 there, drink water from your own cistern. That's a metaphor for sex. You'll see it also when we get over into chapter 9. You'll see it as a metaphor for sex, drinking water from your own cistern. You'll also see this metaphor used in the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon, which is all about redeemed love between a husband and a wife. And should your springs be dispersed abroad there in verse 16? It's a rhetorical question, of course, that expects a no answer. You don't pursue sexual fulfillment with anyone other than your spouse. Should your springs be dispersed abroad? No. Then he says, streams of water in the street? No. That's not where you should pursue sexual fulfillment. Verse 18, let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Again, this emphasizes the sexual pleasure which should be in marriage. Marriage should be full of sexual joy. Marriage should be full of sexual fulfillment. Here in verse 19, the next verse especially brings out the tender affection and exuberant pleasure of sexual love that's in marriage, or that should be in sexual marriage. Look at verse 19. As a loving hind that is a deer, and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. I've underlined that, be exhilarated always with her love. And in verse 18, rejoice in the wife of your youth. And I've connected those. That's what it means. Rejoice. God wants your marriage to be vibrant and fulfilling. And He wants it to be fulfilling in this aspect, this sexual aspect. He wants it to be. That's why He's given us instructions. Again, this is all about life and how to win at life in every area of life, including the area of sex. Be exhilarated always with her love, verse 19. Verse 20, as we get down to the last 4 verses, take a look at it. 2 other reasons, by the way, that's what verses 20 through 23 are all about. 2 other reasons are added for remaining faithful sexually to your spouse. The first is verse 21, and that is because God sees everything. Look at it. And we talked about this. This isn't new, so I'm just going to whip through it. We talked about this when we were in the Sermon on the Mount, and we were having those discussions on lust and sexual purity and marriage and divorce. For why should you, my son, verse 20, be exhilarated with an adulteress and embrace the bosom of a foreigner? For the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and He watches all his paths. Look, you may think you're getting away with something, but God always sees. In the end, you're not getting away with anything. God knows. And then in verse 22, the second reason for sexual faithfulness, the second other reason for sexual faithfulness, marital faithfulness, is not only is God seeing everything, but verses 22 and 23, what you're going to do is, if you continue this path, if you're not faithful, if you're not sexually pure, if you don't heed God's instructions on sexual purity, you're going to be trapped in sin, and it is going to trigger your own destruction. Look at verse 22 and 23. His own iniquities will capture the wicked, and he will be held with the cords of his sin. The further you go down that road, the more entrapped you will be, the more difficult it will be to get out of it. Verse 23, he will die for a lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly, he will go astray. Okay, there's chapter 4 and 5. Chapter 4, again, just emphatic pleading to listen. This is all about right living. It's about winning at life. And it is a reminder that winning in life is all about listening to God and doing what He says. We get over into chapter 5, or in chapter 4, verses 14 through 19. We have one specific moral issue, and that is you don't take the path that bad people take. You take a different path. Chapter 5 is about one of those paths, and that is sexual purity. We're sexual beings, sexual impulses in most people are strong, and we're always faced with that temptation. The Bible doesn't obscure that fact. It doesn't minimize that fact, and we must not obscure it, and we must not minimize it either. To pursue that lifestyle is going to lead to utter destruction. We can't play with fire or we're going to get burned. We got to develop the relationship that we have with our spouse. God has given us this wonderful institution of marriage, and if we'll cultivate it, and all aspects of it, including that sexual aspects of it, which is a very, very important aspect of it, then that area of life is going to be wonderful, and it's going to set us up for victory in a lot of other areas of life. All right, thanks for coming today. Thanks for joining me in Bible study. I hope I'll see you next time as we start chapter 6. Until then, take care and God bless.